Hello and welcome to Small Dog, Big Voice, a webinar about management and training considerations for small dogs who struggle with reactivity. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about and I'm so happy that you're here. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce myself and my dogs, who you'll see in this video. So I'm Tess Morgan. My company is Treat Yourself Dog Training. I'm a multi-certified dog trainer and behavior consultant, and I specialize in reactivity as well as separation anxiety, fear, aggression, and families who have young children or babies and dogs. So I'm so happy to have you here. I'm based in London, Ontario, but I also see clients virtually internationally. My dogs who you'll see in the video are Alvin, who I just call him a mystery mix. We don't really know what he is. I think he has some pug, some German Shepherd, but he's only 22 pounds. So he definitely falls into that smaller dog category. And then I have Lily, who is my generalized anxiety and recovering reactivity dog. She's a Chihuahua miniature pinscher, and she is about 12 pounds, so she's quite small. She also has neurological condition. So if you see in the video, she's kind of walking funny or her body posture is a little bit off, that's her neurological condition, but she's perfectly okay. So let's continue. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this webinar, I want to first define what a small dog even means, because I think it can be quite subjective based on who you're talking to. So when I'm talking about small dogs, I'm talking about dogs who fall under one of two categories. The first category would be very small dogs who can be picked up easily. So these are very light dogs that you can easily scoop up, usually with one hand if you really needed to. And then we have another category, which is shorter dogs who might be a little bit heavier. So this might not be a dog you can pick up easily. However, you can pick them up if you need to, but they are very short to the ground. So I would put a corgi under this category like you see in the picture. Corgis are very low to the ground, so they share a lot of commonalities with other small dogs. However, they're pretty sturdy and thick, so they're not as small and light as other dogs. So let's agree that what we're defining as a small dog fall under these two categories. So little dogs who can be picked up easily and short dogs who may be a bit heavier. I have one of each. So why are small dogs even reactive in the first place? Before we start discussing the things that make small dogs different, we should acknowledge that small dogs are still dogs. So the same motivations for reactivity apply. In general, most dogs are reactive because they're scared of the trigger. They're frustrated that they can't access the trigger and they're prevented by a leash or a gate, or a little bit of a mix of both. So in a lot of dogs, we see conflict, which is, I'm curious about you, but I'm also a little bit nervous about you. And it comes out in this big reaction. So these things apply to small dogs and big dogs alike. However, there are some things that are a little bit different about small dogs that might lend themselves to creating more reactivity as the dog ages. The first thing I want to touch on is socialization. So we know that puppies, when they're young, usually around under 4 months or so, benefit the most from exposure to a lot of different things that we want them to be okay with as adults. So we know when we have a little puppy, we want to take them, we want to give them really positive, safe experiences with other dogs, with new people, with different environments, and so on. So we want to do this regardless of what type of dog we have. However, with small dogs, I think sometimes people feel like they would benefit less from socialization, or they just take socialization a little bit less seriously. So they might think it's less of a problem if my dog doesn't like other dogs or doesn't like people because they're small, so they're easier to manage. The other thing that might happen is that small dogs are more vulnerable to having bad experiences because of their size. If we take our small dog to a puppy class and it's poorly managed, our puppy could be trampled or scared by a big, exuberant puppy and develop fear issues from that. So understandably, some people I think are a little bit more nervous to socialize their small dog like you would a bigger dog. So that's the first reason. Another thing that I kind of mentioned under the socialization category is bad experiences. Any dog can have a bad experience, which can lead to reactivity. However, with small dogs, they can be more vulnerable to bad experiences in dog interactions. So whether that's that puppy class where the puppy's just too exuberant and it's really big and it overwhelms our small dog, Or it could be something like a dog park where our small dog might be overwhelmed by bigger dogs. So sometimes bigger dogs can be aggressive towards small dogs, but more often than not, we're going to have experiences where big dogs are chasing small dogs for fun, trampling them. Maybe they're too pawsy, so they're kind of using their paws too much, and we scare or hurt small dogs by accident. So a lot of these things aren't even results of big dogs being aggressive, but more just the result of a big dog kind of not understanding how to play with a little dog and overwhelming them as a result. We also see small dogs being picked up a lot. And while I'm not against picking up, and we're going to discuss this more as we go along, I think we need to be very careful to advocate for our small dog so that they're not having bad experiences where they're being picked up against their will. So we want to make sure that our dog actively wants to be picked up and that we're putting them down if they don't want to be held anymore and they're telling us that. So small dogs get scooped up, picked up, carried around, even when they don't want to be, and that can cause bad experiences around new people or around body handling. So your small dog might think, I'm going to become reactive because you're not listening to me, and so now I'm going to bark and make a big scene when you try to pick me up, so you leave me alone. Then the third reason is that with small dogs, sometimes we don't take their warnings seriously. So if a bigger dog is growling at us or snapping at us, most people are going to take that pretty seriously because they don't want to be bitten by a big dog and they know how dangerous that can be. With smaller dogs, because they can be less dangerous because they have less force, they're smaller, we can manage them more easily. A lot of people tend to antagonize small dogs for social media, to make like a cute video of a small dog. Even though that dog is having a really hard time, we don't take their warnings as seriously, and that can lead to reactivity as our dog escalates in their warning signals. So I hope that helps kind of summarize the main reasons why small dogs might be more reactive than big dogs in certain cases. Now that we know why dogs might be reactive, we should talk a little bit about how we help dogs feel better and improve their reactivity long term. Now, before we get into the points on the slide, I want to emphasize the importance of working with a professional if at all possible for you. Working with a professional will help narrow down the reason your dog is reactive, whether it's based in fear, frustration, or a bit of both, as well as to identify any factors in your routine or your dog's life that might improve prognosis. However, there are some things that we can do for all reactive dogs that will help them improve in their reactivity. The first thing we want to put into place is management. When we discuss management in dog training, what we're talking about is prevention. Any way that we can prevent our dog from being triggered or reacting to their triggers right now. So, examples of management might be walking in quieter routes or at quieter times of day when your dog is less likely to encounter their triggers, making your home a sanctuary from triggers. So, closing your curtains, putting white noise, making it harder for your dog to be triggered at home, teaching your dog training exercises so that you can practice them outside of the problem context and then use them if you need them around triggers to kind of get out of dodge. And we're going to be talking about that more during this webinar. Really, anything we can do to prevent our dog from practicing their reactivity right now. Because we know the more our dog practices reactivity, the harder it's going to be to change as it becomes more of a habit. So once we have those prevention and management strategies in place, the next step is we want to work on an incremental training plan or behavior modification plan. A good behavior modification plan is going to help change how your dog feels about their triggers, as well as teaching them something else that they can do for rewards or to achieve the same goal as they want, whether it is accessing the trigger or escaping from the trigger. We want to help them feel better about the trigger, keep them feeling safe, as well as teaching them some other behaviors that they can offer in the presence of their trigger that aren't compatible with reactivity. So we have management, we have our behavior modification plan, and then we have meeting our dog's needs. So this is often overlooked, but no dog is going to make a lot of progress if their needs aren't being met. So when we talk about needs being met, we're talking about basic needs, nutrition, medical, so their general health, their physical well-being, appropriate exercise, mental enrichment, rest, social time. So all of those basic needs that make our dog feel their best. We want to make sure we're meeting those consistently. So for this webinar, we're going to focus on how we can apply these management training strategies to help our small dogs in a way that works for them. Okay, so small dogs and big dogs do differ a little bit in what's going to work for them best when it comes to management. And my goal for this webinar is not to give you a full reactivity training plan, because that would take us way off course and we wouldn't be able to get to all our material. So the focus of this webinar is to talk about how we can apply management and training strategies for reactive dogs to our small dog friends. We're going to use the remainder of this webinar to focus primarily on the management side of our training plan. A comprehensive reactivity training plan will have both management and behavior modification components, like we discussed previously. However, many of those components apply to both small and big dogs alike. I'd like to use our time efficiently to discuss how we can get our dog's attention around triggers, redirect them if they have been triggered, and just keep their attention more efficiently in a way that works specifically for small dogs. So we're going to focus on how to manage our dogs around their triggers. We're also going to focus on how to deliver treats in a way that's more effective for a little dog who's closer to the ground and further away from us. Again, a comprehensive reactivity training plan can be discussed in an initial behavior consultation with a professional. So how are small dogs different to train? We know that they learn the same way as big dogs, so the main components of training are going to stay the same. However, small dogs are small, so they're physically further from us and our rewards. They're closer to the ground, so they're closer to all the smells and distractions, and sometimes much closer to their triggers than you are. They are difficult to reward and train physically, so they require a lot of bending over, especially if we're a taller person with a really small dog. And we also have to consider treats. So we can't give as many treats or as big treats. We might have to go out of our way to find smaller treats that are appropriate for our dogs, because in reactivity training, we do use a lot of food. So we want to make sure that our treats are appropriate, our dog doesn't fill up too quickly, and that they don't get sick from having so many treats. So there are definitely some considerations that make small dog training quite a bit different than training a big dog. Step one in our plan to help small dogs with reactivity is to build engagement in a way that works for them. Engagement is such an important part of your training plan, and so you really want to have that super strong before you start working around triggers. When I discuss engagement, what I'm referring to is a dog who checks in with you regularly, looks up at you, comes away from the distractions in the environment, responds to you when you ask them for things. So in general, a dog that is engaged with you. Engagement is key to reactivity success. So we want to make sure we have a really good plan to build that. We also want to make looking away from the ground or distractions that are close to the ground really rewarding. It's hard for small dogs to look away from the ground and all the way up back at us. That's a big distance, and all of the really good things for them tend to be on the ground. So we want to teach them exercises that capitalize on looking away from the ground and back up towards us. The first exercise is called the up-down game. Call your dog over to you and place a treat on the ground in front of you. Wait for your dog to eat that treat and then look back up at you. When they do, you're going to say yes or click, whatever your marker word is, and put another treat down. Repeat this sequence, making sure it always happens in the same way so that it's predictable for your dog. This sequence will teach your dog that looking away from distractions close to the ground and back towards you is super rewarding. Now that we've started to build engagement with our small dogs, we want to make sure that our treat delivery is as efficient as possible. While it's totally fine to lean over and reward your dog from your hand to their mouth, it can be clunky and slow, which is not ideal in reactivity training. Timing matters a lot, whether it means getting out of there quickly because a trigger is coming and your dog can't handle it, or if you're in a training session trying to change the reactivity and we want to mark a moment in time or a specific behavior. We want our treat delivery to be as quick and efficient as possible. We also can hurt our backs and physically not enjoy training if we're having to bend over and kind of manipulate our bodies in a way that's uncomfortable. So we want to make training enjoyable because this does seem to be a problem that's a bit of a long haul issue to work on. And so if we're going to maintain motivation to work on the problem, we want to make sure it's enjoyable for everyone. So you're going to see a couple exercises now that help make training a little bit easier and treat delivery more efficient with smaller dogs. Treat tosses are a fun way to deliver treats where your dog can enjoy running after and chasing the treats, and where you can be strategic about where you're tossing the treats to prevent a reaction. So, if a trigger is coming up behind you, you can keep tossing treats in the direction you're walking to encourage your dog to move faster, or you can toss in the opposite direction if you need to move away. In this video, I'm saying get it so that Alvin understands a treat will be tossed and that he is expected to chase it. When you're first teaching your dog to catch a treat that you throw, I recommend starting close up, a maximum of 1 to 2 feet away from your dog. Use a harder treat versus a more crumbly one so that it's easier to toss. You want to make the throwing motion really obvious here so that your dog can predict when and where the treat will be delivered. Next, it's time to move to tossing the treat in front of your dog from a standing position. You do want to lean over a bit here just to make it really clear to your dog where the treat is coming from. I've left some bloopers in this video because I think it's important to note that dogs won't catch the treat every time, especially when they're first learning this. That's okay as long as they understand what to expect when a treat is tossed. Now you can practice tossing the treat with your dog walking beside you. I've also added in the word catch just so my dog can predict that a treat will be tossed, especially if we're in a more distracting environment.
Get it.
Now that we've learned a few strategies for delivering treats, we have to acknowledge that these strategies do involve putting food on the ground, and with that comes risks. The first risk that we have, and a concern that I hear sometimes about putting food on the ground, is scavenging. So, is our dog going to look for food on the ground all the time now and potentially pick up garbage or other dangerous items because of it? While this is a possibility, it's not something I see often. I don't usually see dogs become more likely to pick up garbage because we're delivering treats to the ground. However, there's no guarantee. So if your dog is really prone to picking up stuff on the ground, or if you're seeing an increase in this kind of scavenging behavior after doing these training exercises, you can stop. You don't have to do them if it's going to cause a problem. But like I said, I don't see it happen often. The second thing we want to be aware of is where we're tossing treats when there's other dogs around. So we don't want to toss treats on the ground if there's a possibility that there's an off-leash dog nearby or any dog nearby that might be drawn in and drawn closer and try to eat those treats. So that's a problem for a few reasons. The first reason is if our dog is scared of other dogs or reactive towards other dogs, obviously we don't want to do anything to have that dog come closer to us. The other thing that can happen, even if our dog, maybe they're reactive to strangers and they don't have an issue with other dogs, but it still can be a problem if another dog comes and there's treats on the ground and there can be conflict, right? So we want to make sure that we're not causing any conflict with other dogs or drawing them closer by putting our treats on the ground. So I would recommend you get as much distance as you can and then place the treat on the ground when it's safe to do so. The other thing that can be really helpful is a find it cue. This is a type of cue we're not going to teach in this webinar, but it really is just teaching your dog that when you say find it or search or something similar, they are going to look on the ground and find any treats that might have been missed. This is really helpful because sometimes we toss a treat and it bounces off to the side, or our dog doesn't see exactly where it went, and we want our dog to be able to search for that treat and find it on cue. Now we talk about picking up small dogs. This can be a contentious issue with a lot of people who have strong opinions on one side or the other. I am not one of those people. I think we should do what is best for our dog. But let's talk about some considerations before we pick up our dog around their triggers. Some dogs are going to feel much safer when you pick them up. If they trust you and they feel really safe in your arms and they're scared of something, it can feel really comforting to be picked up and held away from that trigger so that the trigger cannot access them. This isn't all dogs, however. Some dogs are going to want to run away or aggress towards the trigger, and when you pick them up, they feel trapped. And so small dogs can fall into either of these categories, and we want to be aware of which category our dog falls into. If your dog is okay to be picked up, it can be really helpful. We can get them out of there quickly. Yes, we want to teach them other things they can do, such as an emergency U-turn away from the trigger, or targeting our hands so that we can move them through space. However, in reality, sometimes it's just super helpful to be able to pick our dogs up, either to get out of there or to carry them by a trigger if it's a really close situation, such as a trail where you can't pull over to the side. So it can be really helpful if our dog is okay with it. Whether it's helpful depends on you and your dog. So let's talk about how we can help our dog feel better about being picked up if this is something that we'd like to do. If you're going to pick your dog up, there's a few things that can make it easier on them and you. The first thing is to train it beforehand. We don't want to pick our dogs up only around triggers or try anything really for the first time when we're working around triggers. We want to purposely set our dog up for success by practicing picking them up, giving them treats, making it a really positive experience before we need it. So that's the first thing we can do. The second thing I really like to do when picking a small dog up is using a warning cue. So when I talk about a warning cue, I'm talking about something like pick up or similar that you can say right before you pick the dog up. This, if they don't see you coming and you pick them up suddenly, this can be really startling, especially if they're already kind of triggered and aroused by seeing something in the environment. So the more that we can practice giving them that warning cue before picking them up, we can let them know what's about to happen and prepare them to be picked up rather than startling them unnecessarily. The third thing that we can do is we can keep an eye on their body language. So with reactivity, it's really important that we understand what a dog looks like when they're relaxed, what they look like when they're stressed out, and all of those kind of little nuances in between. So we want to make sure that we know what stressed body language looks like so that we can identify it if our dog is being picked up and showing that they're stressed by it. Now we're going to watch a video showing how we can pick our dog up using a technique called magnet hand. Magnet hand helps our dog to get past triggers in close quarters by eating constantly as if they're attached to your hand like a magnet. So I'm going to show you what this looks like now. The goal of magnet feeding is to keep your dog eating constantly as you pass something triggering. To start, load your hand full of really good treats and close your fist. Present your hand to your dog and slowly unfurl your fist as they are eating. We want our dog to be magnetized to our hand and ideally not to disconnect at all until they're done eating. Once your small dog is familiar with magnet eating on the ground, you can start introducing small pickups while eating. You can see here I am starting with a bit of pressure under the belly without actually picking Lily up and gradually progressing to small lifts. We want to be careful to present the deal up front, meaning that our dog can predict from our hand placement and their position what is about to happen. This will help with startle. I would also recommend using a warning cue such as pick up to let your dog know they are about to be picked up, as this can be very startling, especially when they are already triggered by something in the environment. Here's an example of what it might look like to use magnet hand on a walk. If a trigger is in one direction, feed your dog strategically in the other direction to prevent them from noticing the trigger and/or reacting. Another advantage that we have when we have a small reactive dog is that we have access to means of transportation that can both create a safe space for them and that we can use as a visual barrier as well. Carriers, strollers, and backpacks can all be really great for small reactive dogs if we need to get them through situations that they're not going to be able to handle. These are great tools for vets or groomers, anywhere where you can't control how many other dogs or triggers are going to be there, and you need to protect your dog from bad experiences more easily. They are also great for transportation, other management. So, anywhere that you need your dog to be kind of pulled over to the side to be contained in a safe space. And we really need to make sure that the safe space is protected by us. So if our dog is in their stroller or their carrier, no one is allowed to approach them or bother them so that we can maintain this kind of zen area that they can retreat to. We do want to pre-train this though. So we don't want to just throw our dog in a carrier or stroller. We want to teach them that it's a really amazing thing to be in there before we need it. Even if your dog is not reactive, we should be working as hard as possible to prevent bad experiences, which we know can lead to reactivity later on. The first thing we want to do is advocate for our dog. Don't let people pick them up unless they're actively soliciting it. Tell them to put your dog down if they're not enjoying it, and make sure your dog has space when they need it. Act like their bodyguard. This next thing you want to do is take an extra moment to provide agency if it's safe to do so. Instead of picking your dog up to move them along faster, give them that extra couple seconds to sniff and finish sniffing and then move on. Instead of picking your dog up and moving them outside to go to the bathroom, give them that extra couple seconds to make the choice to come along with you or train behaviors to move them through space that don't require picking them up. I'm not against picking up, but you can imagine how it would feel to live your life in a way where you're never allowed to make your own choices and people are impatient with you and just move you around as much as they want. It wouldn't be very pleasant. And so we want to make sure that we're giving our dog as much choice as we can. Ensure warning signs are respected by everyone. So don't let anyone interact with your dog if you can tell that they are warning that they are feeling stressed, even if it's more subtle body language cues that only you can see. Make sure that no one is antagonizing your dog or unnecessarily handling or interacting with your dog when they're trying to warn them. If we respect early warning signs, we're less likely to see growling, snapping, biting, and kind of the more intense displays of reactivity. Remove them from situations when they're scared. When Lily was a young dog, maybe 1 or 2, I used to take her to dog parks and she would go to the door and try to leave the dog park. And I was not a trainer yet and I did not have very much knowledge. And so I did not allow her to leave because I was like, oh, keep having fun, keep staying in the dog park. I want to stay. So if you see that your dog is scared, remove them. Don't see just how it will play out and just kind of leave them there to figure it out for themselves. Get them out of there because the more bad experiences they have, the more likely they're going to be reactive in the future. Train any kind of handling, picking up, husbandry, grooming, outfits, costumes, anything you want to do to your dog physically, you want to train beforehand as much as possible. So setting up intentional training sessions to help them have really positive experiences with these things before you need them. And if your dog is going to the dog park, and I'm not against dog parks as long as they're managed safely, if your dog is going to this dog park, I would recommend seeking out dog parks that have a section for dogs that are smaller than 30 pounds usually. Usually it's 20 or 30 pounds. That way, yes, your dog could still have a bad experience, but it's much safer for your dog to be playing and interacting with dogs that are closer to their size. So, and the other thing that we can do is we can set up play dates. So if you're not comfortable with the dog park or if your dog isn't comfortable with the dog park, set up play dates with known dogs that you know are good with small dogs so that they have a good experience. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar. I hope it was helpful for you and your small dog. You'll see there is a promo code on this slide if you'd like to work together on any service or package, which you can find on my website listed on the next slide. Thank you so much and happy training.